For hairs, that was all that stood between a killer and 30 years of freedom. Not a confession, not an eyewitness. For male arm hairs, sealed inside a plastic evidence bag, placed on a shelf at the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office, where they would sit unreadable for nearly 3 decades. The evidence existed the entire time. Science simply had not learned to hear it yet. On September 21st, 1996, 15-year-old Danielle Houchins, everyone called her Danny, had an argument at home and asked to drive to the Gallatin River to clear her head. Her mother said yes. Danny stopped at the gas station near their neighborhood first, grabbed a water bottle, and headed to Cameron Bridge fishing access. She had been there dozens of times. Gravel lot, cottonwood trees, a path to the river, the kind of place that felt completely safe. What happened at that access site had nothing to do with Danny doing anything wrong. It happened because someone had already decided what that afternoon would look like before she arrived. Her 7-year-old sister Stephanie watched her pull out of the driveway. By evening, Danny's mother drove to Cameron Bridge herself. The truck was still in the lot, doors unlocked, the water bottle in the dirt near the path, the keys beside it. The distance between where Danny parked and where her body was found measured less than 100 yards. Someone had already left by the time the search began. Search teams were called in as the light went flat and the temperature dropped. Family friends fanned out through the brush and marshy sections away from the main trail. Danny was found that same night beneath a willow tree in a marshy section away from the main trail. The water where she lay was less than 8 inches deep. The autopsy confirmed she had not drowned by accident. Bruising on the back of her neck was consistent with significant downward force applied by a hand. She had fought back. The physical evidence made that plain. During examination, investigators recovered 4 male arm hairs from her body. No follicular roots attached. In 1996, that single anatomical detail meant one thing. No usable nuclear DNA profile could be extracted from them. The science required intact root cells. Without roots, the hairs could be preserved and cataloged, but they could not point to anyone. The hairs were logged, sealed, and placed on a shelf. The Gallatin County Sheriff's Office partnered with the FBI and Montana Division of Criminal Investigation. Fishing licenses reviewed. Vehicle sightings cross-referenced against local registrations. Sex offenders within 50 miles systematically identified, interviewed, and investigated. Dozens of people connected to that access site were brought in and questioned. Every lead collapsed under its own weight. No eyewitness placed an unknown person near Danny at the right time. The FBI ran the case through VICAP, the National Behavioral Database for Unsolved Homicides. No pattern match surfaced anywhere in the region. Cold cases are not always failures of effort. Sometimes they are failures of time. The man responsible had already gone home before the search teams arrived. By the time the file cooled, he had resumed his life as though that Saturday had never happened. By the time investigators tested those hairs again, nearly a decade had passed. In 2005, mitochondrial DNA analysis offered qualified hope. Unlike nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA is inherited maternally and shared across family lines. It cannot uniquely identify a person, but it can sometimes be extracted from rootless hair shafts. It can establish ancestral markers and narrow a population. The hairs were submitted again. Results came back. Markers were identified. A general ancestral background indicated. Not enough. Without a suspect to compare against, the results existed in isolation. They narrowed the field in the abstract and left the investigation exactly where it had been, holding a biological connection to an unknown man with no mechanism to identify him. The hairs went back into storage. The file kept moving from desk to desk as detectives retired and were replaced. Each handoff required a new investigator to read back through the same materials, follow the same documented dead ends, and arrive at the same closed door. The problem was not that anyone gave up. Every legitimate path had been followed to its end. The end was always the same. Stephanie Houchins was growing up alongside all of it. She had been 7 in 1996. By 2005, she was a teenager, raised in a house where September 21st was never allowed to pass quietly. Every anniversary, the family answered the phone when reporters called. Every year the story was told again, not because anyone believed the retelling would solve anything, but because the alternative was allowing Danny to disappear a second time. Stephanie eventually became older than her sister had ever been. She passed that age without marking it publicly. The milestone carried a weight that had no ceremony. The four Hares had survived every file transfer, every budget cycle, every personnel change. Still there, still sealed. In 2019, new Sheriff Dan Springer reviewed the cold case backlog and pulled the Houchins file. Forensic genealogy had by then moved from experimental to proven, building family trees outward from distant relatives in public ancestry databases until the branches narrowed toward one person. The Hares went to a California laboratory. Advanced extraction methods recovered nuclear DNA from one shaft. For the first time in 23 years, the evidence could finally speak. The profile went into CODIS, the national DNA database maintained by the FBI. The system compared it against millions of profiles from individuals with qualifying criminal convictions. No match returned. That was not a dead end. It was the most important data point the investigation had produced since 1996. No CODIS match meant the man those Hares belonged to had never been arrested for a qualifying offense. He had lived 3 decades outside every database that might have found him. He had not hidden carefully. Nothing had ever given investigators a reason to look in his direction. The genealogists got to work. They built outward from distant cousins, people who had submitted DNA to ancestry databases with no idea a homicide investigation was moving through their bloodline. From those edges, they traced forward through public records, narrowing the pool with every generation crossed until the branches stopped producing multiple candidates. They stopped on one name: Paul Hutchinson, 55 years old, resident of Dillon, Montana, roughly 2 hours from Belgrade. No criminal record, never flagged by any database, never surfaced in any prior canvas. For nearly 3 decades, he had worked as a federal employee managing public lands across Montana. Steady, anonymous, completely unremarkable to anyone looking from the outside. In 1996, he had been a graduate student at Montana State University in Bozeman studying fisheries biology. His coursework brought him regularly to river access sites across the Gallatin Valley. Cameron Bridge was exactly the kind of location he would know by name, visit without logging, and park it on a Saturday morning without drawing a single look from anyone who happened to see his vehicle. If this case has stayed with you, share this video right now. Someone needs to hear this story. Then come back, because what happened next is the part nobody anticipated. Investigators had a name. They still did not have enough to charge him. They began planning a surveillance operation, a discarded cup, a bottle, anything Hutchinson had touched in a public space that could yield a direct biological sample without his knowledge. Done correctly, that kind of collection required patience and procedural precision. It required time. Before the operation could deliver what they needed, investigators decided to interview Hutchinson directly first. They wanted to watch him. They wanted to place him in a room with questions and see what his body did when the questions got harder. The interview took place on July 23, 2024. Nearly 2 hours. Investigators did not reveal what the DNA had shown or how far the genealogical work had gone. They asked questions and they watched. His hands moved in repeated patterns across the table. His eye contact dropped and did not return. A physical stillness replaced whatever ease he had carried into the room when the interview began, the kind of stillness that is not calm but the opposite of it. Investigators placed a photograph of Danielle Houchins on the table in front of him. He looked away from it. He did not look back. No confession, no usable statement. He answered in the careful way of someone who understood that saying very little was safer than saying anything at all. When the interview ended, he left. Investigators left believing they knew exactly who they were dealing with. They had the legal basis to obtain a direct DNA sample. They planned to move within days and had the evidence architecture to support every step that would follow. They never got the chance. Less than 8 hours after the interview ended, at 4:17 in the morning on July 24th, a call came into dispatch from Paul Hutchinson requesting assistance. Deputies responded and found him near a highway turnout south of Dillon. He had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The investigation did not stop. Montana law permits biological sample collection during autopsy examination. Investigators exercised that authority immediately. The sample was submitted against the DNA profile extracted from the hair recovered from Danny's body in 1996. The comparison was processed. Complete match. Not partial. Not consistent with a close relative. A direct, complete match confirming that the hair found on Danielle Houchins in September 1996 had come from the body of Paul Hutchinson. He had been 27 years old that Saturday morning. He drove away from Cameron Bridge fishing access and resumed a life that would span another 28 years. A graduate degree completed. A federal career built. A marriage. Children who grew up not knowing what their father had done the year before some of them were born. A retirement. A reputation among colleagues as someone dependable and quiet. That distance closed in a laboratory result that fit on a single page. The Gallatin County Sheriff's Office announced the identification publicly. The case was formally closed. No charges filed. No trial. No courtroom. No testimony read aloud under oath while Danny's family sat in the gallery and waited for a verdict. The legal system had reached the end of what it was able to do. Stephanie Houchins made a public statement. She had been 7 years old when her sister did not come home. She was now in her mid-30s. She said that having a name did not return what had been taken. She said the family had lived inside the uncertainty for so long that learning to exist without it was going to take a different kind of time than any of them had language for yet. The answer came. 28 years after the question was first asked, it came. The one question no laboratory result could ever process, the oldest and simplest one, remained. Why? The investigators who first worked this case in 1996 preserved the evidence correctly. They submitted it for testing. They followed every lead to its documented end. The hairs sat on that shelf not because anyone failed, but because the science needed 2 more decades to develop the capacity to read them. That distinction matters. It does not make the 28 years shorter. Across this country tonight, evidence rooms hold sealed bags from cases marked as beyond recovery. This case proves that designation is not permanent. It describes only what science can do right now. And right now keeps changing. Danielle Houchins was 15 years old. She did not come home. Her family refused to let her name go quiet for 28 years. The 4 hairs solved this case. But Danny's name stayed alive because the people who loved her would not allow the silence. Share this. Subscribe. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice keeps these stories alive.